Welcome to the Know Your Legacy podcast. I'm your host, Vipul Basania, and today's guest is Isabel Hundt. Isabel is the author of The Power of Faith-Driven Success. She's also an international speaker, transformational coach, and a contributor to the Huffington Post. Isabel, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. I know we've been trying to do it for a while, so I'm really glad that we finally got a chance to make it happen before the end of the year.
It's been a few months, that's true.
I know. How was, just before we get into the questions, how was the Greatness Summit? Because I know you went there a few months ago, didn't you?
Yes, it was great. It was slightly overwhelming because there's always a lot of energy and people are very hyped up. So it's very loud and people get very excited and sometimes a little bit too excited for my taste because I'm like, okay, that's too much energy right there. But it was great. We had amazing speakers. It was very inspiring. I loved it. It was good.
What would you say one of your biggest takeaways were if you were to share it with someone?
I think the common denominator of all speeches and talks were about just do it. Own who you are, own what you can bring to the table, and just do it. That's pretty much what it came out to. All of them, all of their stories. From Lindsay Sterling to Eric Thomas, everyone was like, just do it. Like, you are, like, you have the power, you can do it. So it was definitely like that.
Yeah, no, I guess every story ends up being very similar in the sense that each of the messages are different, but the story, the common theme is basically the same. And I see that across many people. I went to Thrive in September and it was the same, a lot of high level speakers. And the one common thing I saw was just take action, regardless of where you are in your life. It doesn't matter what circumstance you're in. As long as you're taking one step forward in front of the other, then you'll make progress in your life. Most people end up staying exactly where they are because they're overthinking. So,
yeah, that's true.
But yeah, no, just to get into your story then, because I know you've been on a bit of an adventure. First of all, what's life like in Germany? Because if I understand correctly, that's where you were born.
Yes, I was born and raised in Germany, actually East Germany. So I grew up in the DDR. So that means under communism when it was still that. But the wall came down when I was about 7 years old. So I didn't experience too much. And honestly, people always talk about communism and what they think of communism. I'm like, I don't know. I think what I still remember is that it was very strict. Moms usually stayed home, but I also grew up in a small town, so it was kind of usual. I think what happened and what I know from my dad is that there was a lot of surveillance, a lot of observation. I think his files were like that thick, where they make notes about everything, where you were, what you wore, everything was controlled. And because we belonged to a church, he wasn't allowed to get any higher education. So it was very interesting. But the most significant that I remember is that my mom always put the bananas on top of the shelf saying they have to ripe for another 2 weeks because they came with the West packages. So those are I think when you look back growing up in Germany, you definitely cherish the relationships. There's even a difference between East and West Germany in general, where East Germany, when you have friends there, you have friends there for life. Everyone sticks together. You just usually go back and you just meet the people again. It's like never anything changed, even though we haven't seen each other in 20 years. So you have those people and you can count on them. And then when I studied in East and West Germany, it was a little bit more fast-paced like it is here in the US. People, more of that surface level relationships. If you fit in my lifestyle, then you're welcome. If you don't fit in, then you're not welcome. So it was a little different growing up and then really being able to cherish the values, the ethics that I had growing up, and taking that with me in the way I create business and the way I create relationships all over the world. That really has helped and has made a big difference, I think. There's a lot of people, the number one thing that people say about me, I don't think I have ever seen anyone with such a high level of integrity. And that comes because I have this understanding that we're all human beings, that we're all individuals that want to feel connected and be seen. And so whatever I say or do, I will do. I really care about the person. And I think it is related to the way I grew up.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I know you've got a really like empathic and emotional side of you that's quite strong. That's like your natural strong side of your
Yes.
personality. So where do you think that was shaped? Was it primarily in Germany, or was it like when you moved over?
I think the way I connect with people, the way you create relationships and friendships, that is the way I grew up, because that what my parents lived. We always had friends over. Sundays was the friends day. You always got together with other families, and you did something, or you had sleepovers. So I think that part of it, I my parents brought into the way we grew up. But the empathic side, I don't think, especially that I was part of a Lutheran church, nowadays, the way I operate, what I do as my work, they probably wouldn't let me get back into church, let's say it that way. I think anything that's considered supernatural is more of a sect. I remember my grandparents for the first time when I came here, and I joined a non-denominational church and started with the work that I do. That was like, oh, I think you joined a sect. You can't do that. Like, that's dangerous. You're in a dangerous area, and don't do that. So that's kind of the narrow-mindedness of a very small town that you grew up in East Germany. So that's another addition to, like, that adds to it, to the narrow-mindedness. They usually, people never leave that little town of 10,000 people. And so developing that empathic skill, that highly sensitive skill, and the supernatural gifts that kind of come with it, that happened here in the US. I don't think I would have been able to do that and to recognize that if I would have stayed in Germany.
That's interesting because I know that you've said before that I think it was a dream or a vision that came to you that you wanted to, or you had a
Mm-hmm.
pull to come to the US. So like, talk to us a little bit about that. Like, where did that come in? Like, what age did that happen, and then what were the steps you took from being in Germany to then moving over?
Yeah. I think it was around 12. I was 11, 12. It was right after the wall came down. I remember my dad finally was able to get a degree, and he got his degree in social work. And that's when I also got really interested in psychology and sociology and how our brain works and our heart. Like, I read his books at the age of 12, his college books. And a funny story, when I was around that age, I applied, or I sent out in requests for information from different universities for psychology majors. And they always send out this really awesome pamphlet with, like, this is a little example of what the classes look like. And I was just always fascinated by it. So I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to come back in 6 years. But it was funny. So learning that and really getting aware of what I'm thinking, where I'm thinking, and how things work. At some point in the middle of the night, I had this dream. I can't remember if I woke up from it or not, but I definitely remember remembering it in the morning, where I had this dream. I saw myself as an adult. I knew that was me. I could see myself speaking on a stage. It was a really beautiful, almost like a theater stage. And then there were thousands of people, and I watched myself. I was all the way in the back. I was like, what am I doing there? What language is that? And to underline the importance of the language part, I hated English. I really sucked at it. Especially we learned British English, no offense, but we learned British English in Germany in school. I'm like, I don't like English. I don't know what they're speaking. It doesn't sound like what the teacher's saying either. So I didn't know. I kind of pushed it aside, but it really it just really started that fire inside of me, where I was like, okay, there's something with it. And every time I tried to make a decision moving forward, that dream came back up. I was like, where am I supposed to go? What is this about? And then when I was around 16, that's when some Bible school students came to our town for an outreach. And they are mostly Americans and Canadians. And one of them stayed with us, and I heard him speak. I'm like, that is the language that I spoke on that stage. I'm not supposed to go to the US. I don't want to go there. That's too far away. That's not safe. I can't do this. And but I loved talking to him. I loved having those conversations about the U.S. and where he grew up. And he also spoke German, so I was able to communicate with him in a proper way. But I still sucked at it. But interestingly enough, when I was 18, I went to my teacher and I said, you know what? I think I'm going to go to the U.S. at least for a year and try to figure out what it is and where I'm supposed to be and what that dream is about. And she's like, yeah. Oh, good luck. I think you're going to be back in 2 weeks. I'm like, no, it's not going to happen. I have a little bit of pride there. I really could not embarrass myself in that way and coming back halfway through. I have 4 younger siblings as well. So I had to be the role model. You push through as the oldest. You don't look back. You just do it. Anyway, so I came to the US at the age of 18. And when I got and landed in DC, the air, it almost was so familiar to the point that I called my parents like, are you sure I wasn't adopted? Like, did you adopt me from here? And I look like them. So obviously it's not true, but yeah, but it was definitely this internal yes. So I went through this year. I learned English very quickly within a year, almost with no accent, which is very rare for Germans because we always have this kind of strange, strong accent in speaking English. And after this year, it was like, I just belong here. I need to come back here. I went back to Germany. I studied first economics. That didn't work out. I ended up with a lot of health issues, especially mental health issues, because, well, I didn't do what I knew I was supposed to do because I thought this is how I'm going to get back. This is the only way how I can find a job in the US, right? When I study economics. Who studies psychology and goes to the US? You have no jobs there. They don't have jobs here for those people. So why would they take me? But it got to the point where I got a letter after 2 years from the university saying, well, sorry, but I think, yeah, you can't come back next time. You got pretty much kicked out. You haven't been able to get your grades up. You're done. I'm like, great. I already missed a year going overseas. Then I missed 2 years and lost 2 years studying economics. Now I'm the oldest if I were to start over again. Well, I decided to start over, and I started sociology and psychology, and that was amazing. I kind of just focused on getting through. I didn't create too many relationships and friendships during that time because I was just focused on getting through, and I've made it in 3 years instead of 4. So I'm really proud of myself for doing that. But I was still in my head about how do I get back to the US? This dream came up, and something was just stirring up inside of me. I also worked with international students at the university, which I absolutely loved. And I was very drawn, obviously, to the American students. And everyone was like, oh, you're an American student too? I'm like, no, I just work here. But I was their to-go person. They trusted me right away, no matter where they were from. Interestingly enough, I was able to bring all those different cultures together in a way that they just felt safe. They called me when something was going on. They showed up like, hey, I have this problem. Can you please help me? So I knew I have a way of communicating and connecting with people no matter what background, no matter what language they're speaking. I was always that go-to person, and even though I wasn't that much older than them. But at the age of 26, the law changed around here where you were able to come back on an international exchange program, visa, or however it's called. And I came back. I was like, well, I really don't want to come back as an au pair, as a nanny. That sucked. And I'm old enough to be the kid's parent, and I don't want to do that. But it was the only way for me to do it at that point. Like, okay, at least I would make some money, right? I have some organization that backs me up, and I can do this. So I came back at the age of 26. I got out of a really bad relationship with an American at that point, right before. So that didn't work out. Like, you see, like every time you get attached to a dream and you think you know how it's supposed to work out, it never works out. Like, it's always a mess. You always struggle. So that surrendering part, I couldn't do it. Like, I needed to have control. I needed to be able to tell the universe, this is how it's going to work, and you better make it work the way I want this to be. Otherwise, I'm going to be really stubborn, and Germans are known to be a little bit stubborn. So that, but I did come back and didn't work out so well. I worked for a family in New York. I experienced a lot of discrimination there, which is, when you grow up in Europe, you don't really experience it that much, because 30 minutes east you have Czech Republic and Poland, and then there are Russians and Turkish people. There's so many different nationalities. You don't think about it the way Americans think.
Yeah. What were you doing with the family? Sorry, just before you carry on. So what were you?
Yeah, I worked for them as a nanny again, and it was a Black family, so it was really like, I didn't care about it. For me, they were just people, human beings who needed someone to take care of their children, and they were adorable. Oh my goodness, I loved those boys. But there was something going on between the parents, and I knew what was going on, even though they didn't tell me. But at some point, they just wanted to get rid of any female in the house, and made up lies about me. And I was glad, because the other nanny was still there, and I was just supposed to shadow her, and we're still friends. And she said, none of this ever happened. I was there, like we were together 24/7. It never happened. Yeah, but they got their money back. And then I went to San Francisco. That was quite the experience as well, because the mom had a bit of a control issue, and she made everyone sound like they're literally the beggar from the street, and she's the only queen that's available in the country. But she was from Iran. She grew up and was born in Iran, but she grew up in a rich family. So she had this understanding, whoever works for her does whatever she wants. And that was a different experience. At the age of 27, I had parents. I was done having anyone tell me what I'm supposed to do. But it was an interesting experience, because I realized how different people treat each other depending on their perceived status. I was literally down here. And in the US, I don't know if you noticed that, but there's a ranking. And the ranking pretty much goes white people, then there's people of color and minorities, and then there's immigrants. And then there are the immigrants who work for immigrants. and often what I had to realize was that people who already felt like they're not actually respected in this country, who had to work really hard to receive a certain status and be perceived as a person, they had to make someone else feel worse. It's what you focus on within yourself, to make yourself feel better, you push it on someone else. And that's pretty much what she did. And I couldn't understand that. Like I said, my understanding of people is we're all equal. I don't know why you treat me the way you do. And she actually kicked me out after 4 weeks. And then I didn't know where to go, because the agency was kind of clueless. They're like, okay, you're really qualified. You speak English perfectly. Everyone we talk to who actually likes you, they talk very highly of you. It's just the families, but they got kicked out of the program at some point because they had some, other women who they didn't treat very nicely anyways. But it was an interesting experience, because at that point I had nowhere to go. A friend of a friend of a friend who knew someone else who stayed there and lived there, who was also, I think she was from, where was she from? Somewhere from East Europe. And she opened her house for me. She said, you can stay with me for a while until we have things figured out. She didn't know who I was. She didn't know me at all. She just took in a stranger, just because she could relate to my situation. And then eventually I wasn't able to stay with her, and she even paid for a hotel room for me and food, because I had no money left. I had nothing left. And then another family opened up. I mean, their kids, they had a very small home. They had 4 little kids, and the two girls stayed in one room in a bunk bed. They both moved out to stay in the same room with their little siblings in the small little beds, just so that I can have a room for myself. I don't think I had ever been so humbled and so feel that love. But then again, all of them had a different background. even though they grew up in the US, they were still international background. The dad's parents were from Asia. So very interesting how the dynamics of different cultures played into how I developed into where I'm at today. And then I moved to Indianapolis at some point, and that's where I met my husband. And that wasn't quite the easy ride either, because he didn't want to get married at first. And then I had to go to Canada. I'm not going to talk too much about that because it was just a total up and down. And then eventually we did get married. Pretty much within a year we got married, and we're still married. Now it's been exactly yesterday, actually. Yesterday it's been 8 years. So
wow, congratulations.
Yeah. So, and that's how my entrepreneurial story started, because I never had a job until then. I never worked for someone else. Besides working as a nanny, but I never really experienced it as a real job, more like an exchange, a cultural exchange. And at the age of 27, never had a career, didn't have a family, didn't have any money. That was a little bit embarrassing and very, very humbling, to the point like, what in the world am I doing?
Yeah, definitely. You know, it definitely doesn't match the story that society wants to try and fit you into, of getting a job and getting married and all that sort of stuff. And I want people to just pause here and just think that obviously, like, your life wasn't over. You didn't die just because you didn't get married at a certain age, or that you didn't get a job straight after college or university. Like, you went out traveling and exploring, and things still ended up working out for the better in the end. So I want to kind of get into that now, which is like, so you're 27, the point that you just described. Where does the book come in? Like, why did you write the book?
I never considered myself a writer because I literally hated writing, but I loved speaking. And that's when I came here, I thought, okay, maybe I get my master's degree in counseling. And then that didn't feel right. And I didn't have $60,000. And so someone invited me to join a coaching training. And it was an ontological coaching training, meaning it was more of a spiritual, where you talk about essence and core values and survival mechanism, this kind of a really spiritual training. And that literally stripped me naked. Okay, not literally, but like in the sense, like I was like exposed down to the soul level. And that's when I really figured out who I am and how to describe what I experience. I always was able to see everything in color, and I was able to receive messages through different, if it was through animals or nature. It was just, I always felt very connected and very divinely driven, but I was also rebelling against it. Like, I was like, why would I do this? Like, it doesn't make sense according to social standards. It doesn't make sense to what people would say or think about me. So I went through the coaching training, and I came out, well, quite well. I had a little bit of an identity crisis because then I didn't know what to do with all of that. But it was, so the book came out 3 years ago, and I have my business for now 7 years. So it was about 2 years, 5 years, 4 years. And she said, I don't, can you tell it's Friday? So it was a few years in, and I recognized the commonalities between all my clients, but I felt so compelled to help people really understand what it means to trust your intuition. How does it work with your body? How does it scientifically make sense, but also how does it make sense spiritually, not religiously, but spiritually? How can we prove that both is actually possible? And one day like I said, everything just happens for a reason. You connect to the people that you need to connect at that point. I met with someone, she's also from the UK. We connected, and she's like, oh yeah, I help people write their book. I'm like, nah, I don't want to write a book. And she came back over and over. And then I met someone, oh yeah, I design book covers. I love doing that. And I coach people in finding their right message. I'm like, why are all those people showing up? I want to write a damn book. Leave me alone with it. But eventually I was like, okay, I'll just start with my own story. I had it a little bit figured out, but I was back and forth. Like, I want to reach the young people because I really believe that we have a huge awakening going on within younger generations. I would say Generation X and younger. And there was just so much that I wanted them to know. And I already had my son then. And I was like, okay, if I were to die today, what do I want him to know? If all he had of me was that book, what do I want him to know? And that's when I started writing the book. But halfway through, I did not want to continue. It's like, this doesn't make sense. I don't want to work on this anymore. It doesn't feel right. Something is missing. I'm missing something. And so one morning, I always got up at like 3:30, 4 o'clock to write. One morning, it was Saturday morning, I went downstairs and I said to my husband, I give up on this book. I'm not a writer. I'm a speaker. I'm not going to do this. And he's like, are you sure? Like, I really think you're supposed to write this. Again, it doesn't matter. And then suddenly we both looked outside and we're like, what was that? And he's like, I don't know. And we kept looking and there were suddenly 3 hawks sitting on our patio railing. 3. We live in a suburban area. Every now and then you see one, but they don't stay very long because there's not much food around here. But there were 3 sitting next to each other and they just looked at me. And suddenly I felt this download of information and I said to him, I see the whole book in front of my mind. I see exactly what is supposed to happen and what I'm supposed to write about and what I need to change. So I sat back down, rewrote everything I already had written. And all those 2 weeks that I wrote this book, I really sat down and just wrote it. My husband went to his mother with our son. So I just had the whole time to write. Those hawks were sitting outside my window every single day when I wrote. And when I turned in my book to have it edited, they left. And they didn't come back after that. Now, every now and then one comes back and he sits in the willow tree in front of my window when I doubt my business, when I feel like, okay, I just want to give up on this whole thing. I don't want to be an entrepreneur. Then one comes back. It's almost like an encouragement, like, you can do it, you can do it. So that was very significant in the way the book came out. And then I thought, oh, now I have this really awesome book with this really awesome cover. It looked like Brene Brown's book, like the cover of Daring Greatly. It was a little bit similar. So I was like, oh, that's going to be awesome, really successful. Well, it wasn't. I maybe sold like 100 books within the next 1 or 2 months after I published it. So I was really disappointed. But now, 3 years later, the book is taking off. It's so weird. And I meditated on that. I was like, okay, why is this? Why am I always creating stuff and it's not giving any results? But when I wait a few years, it just suddenly takes off. And then I'm like, okay, where is this success coming from? And what I heard during one of those meditations is, you are preparing ahead. If I wouldn't have you do this now, you would never do it. You would literally freak out when you know the time is right and people need it. You would, like, that's how I am, because I would freak out in that moment. So it's literally, it's like, what I heard was, you're paving the way. You're just creating it so that people get used to the idea and eventually they can adapt to it and they can accept the idea that you're bringing. And that was a struggle, especially as someone, people who are empath know that, especially I coined the term empath warriors. Those are the introvert with a very strong, passionate message out into the world, but they don't want to because they feel overwhelmed and there's this anxiety and the frustration and so much going on in their head and overthinking and overfeeling. So there's this really strong message in us. We can't just give up. We don't just have a business to have a business. There's always more. So I know with my work that I'm always working ahead, always. I always complain about that with my husband. He's like, people will be ready to hear it soon. People will be ready to hear it soon. I'm like, I don't have that patience. But we know manifestation comes with patience, right? And that never has been my strong suit, but it is something that I have been tested over the last 20-something years. What it means to really trust, to surrender, not giving up, but to surrender to the flow of life and to just still do it. The patience part, just do it and trust me and then be patient and wait. I'm like, I don't want this. I want this right now and right here. But that's not how life usually works, especially if someone who's an empath who receives messages in a supernatural way, who can connect with people in a very significant way. Like for me, I don't care about someone's skin color. I don't necessarily care about someone's background. What really is important to me is how someone makes me feel. It's like when you're blind and you don't see any of that. And then it's like you're deaf and you can't hear the story at all. Envision the person who's deaf and blind and all they have is feel. That's how I feel into people that I connect with. That's where I see the true person, because I'm known as the leader's heart decoder. And what that means is that I see colors around people, but it's not really around people like the aura. It's the heart. I just have to focus on the heart, and then suddenly it's like a color, a dominant color that jumps into my head. And then usually, like we know, psychology of color has a specific meaning in the message, and then sometimes visions come to it. But like I said, for me, that's the experience, and the whole journey that I've gone through got me to the point where now I'm an advocate for intercultural communication through emotions. I had a vision. I was working on my TED Talk. I haven't made it on stage yet, but I have it ready to go just in case.
I love that. Yeah, exactly. I love that.
I have it all here. Like, it's all practiced and done. And I have all the props ready to go. So if anyone would call, like, can you do that next week? I'm like, okay, I'm a little crazy, but all right, I can do it, I think. Anyways, but when I was working on it, I didn't quite know what I wanted to talk about as a very significant message, overall social issue. And that same night, I had a dream. And I didn't quite get it. When I woke up, I was just sitting in silence. I'm like, what was that dream about? What was that? Why was I sitting there? And I didn't know anyone when I should have. They talked to me like they know me. I didn't know what I was supposed to do there. And all I heard is, people can only heal if they experience amnesia. Like, well, dang, you want to make everyone have amnesia? Do you want me to hit everyone over the head? But it was really, like I said, suddenly, if you can only create your own story if you don't have the pre-burdens that you've already born with. And we're not focusing enough on the healing on a molecular basis. We're so focused on creating change on the outside, creating movements, but they're all that from a place of pain and wounding. So that's what my TED Talk is actually about. In regards to epigenetics and transgenerational trauma. But I have this ability to create everything in pictures. Like, if you look at my writing, I always have like this really cool metaphors and analogies, how I talk to people. I'm like, oh, well, now it makes sense. So that's how my talks are too, like very, very, I don't know how to call it, almost like a fairy tale, but not really. So yeah, and this ability helped me really to say, okay, we are capable of just feeling with people instead of just reacting and responding to whatever they blur out, or how they're dressed, or their family background, or even what they've done. Something that I want to share, when I wrote my book, I had two very significant visions. You know, those where you stop in your track and you don't know what to do. It feels so real that you start to sweat and you can't stop it. Well, one of them was that I was in front of I don't even know, thousands and thousands, I couldn't see an end, thousands of people who you would consider terrorists, criminals, people who had so much anger. I could feel it. It suffocated me, that anger and that hatred that they brought with them. And I was like, what am I supposed to do with them? Like, they're going to kill me. And all I heard was, tell them you see them. I'm like, yeah, right. Like, they're going to hear me. Like, I'm the only person standing in front of all of them. Like, tell them you see them. And so I did. And in the vision, what happened, this huge wall of anger and desperation and hatred just fell down. You could feel the energetic wall crashing down, and suddenly you saw the individual, the human being, and they started to cry, almost like a relief. Someone took that all off of them, and you see me. And that was so powerful for me, just to have that vision while I was writing this book. And then it came back a couple times. I mean, it stays with you, something like that. When I started writing my speeches, when I connect with people, it's like, okay, God, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I don't know if I want to do all this. I'm tired, but okay. So every time there's something else that comes back into, like, no, you have a mission. You have a very unique way of connecting with people, a very unique way of seeing people, and you need to teach people what it looks like, what it could feel like, and how to really feel into situations, feel into people, instead of just reacting and being led by triggers that just come at you, or that triggers that are within you, but really focusing on the healing so that we can have this true connection again. And well, it's quite some work, because I still get triggered many times when I talk to people. I'm like, oh, you're such an asshole. Like, I can't, you're an idiot. Like, no. And I get reminded, I'm like, okay, look beyond that. You can show compassion even with people that you don't like. And that is very significant every time. I literally have it sitting here somewhere, like, you can show compassion with people that you don't like. It is possible to have both. But I just want to punch them in the face. Can I not do that? No, you cannot. Like, oh. And then I usually punch something else around me, like the wall.
I can imagine. No, it's difficult to harness that, because we're not really taught to have emotional intelligence in school. We're not really taught how to harness those emotions. So like when we feel it, we just react it, because I guess coming from a more spiritual perspective, we think we are our emotions when we're not. Like if we detach ourselves from them and say we're feeling, I know it's the most difficult one's probably anger, when we're feeling anger in the moment.
Yes.
But we aren't anger, we're just experiencing anger. And when I heard that, because I was listening to, what was it now? I think there was a guy who's translating the Sanskrit version of Bhagavad Gita, or something along those lines. It was either that or it was a different spiritual text. I can't remember. But anyway, I can send it to you afterwards if you're interested. But
yeah,
anyway,
I'd be curious.
Yeah, and he was talking to a school about how they were in the text. He was talking about how we are not our emotions, but we are experiencing our emotions. So he was trying to explain the whole difference between being a human being as you are in your body, and then your soul or your spirit, and like how to explain the difference. And because we don't know the difference, we're experiencing this human life in a way that's really, it's not at the full potential that it could be. We're not having a full experience, because we're not transcending beyond the five senses. Like we think we are the five senses when we're not. That's just our way of communicating in this world. But there is a way to communicate that's deeper than that, if we take the time to actually understand our bodies. So I don't know if that comes into your work at all, like what your views are.
Oh, yes. I mean, especially empath, and we see it in being empathic, showing empathy. I mean, there's a difference between being empathic and showing emphasis. I know empathy, empathy. But emotions has become the foundation of my work, because especially people who are highly sensitive are so driven by their emotion that I needed to find a way to explain to them how they can become friends with their emotions. And so I actually have been writing a series on that topic for a magazine called The Daring Woman magazine. So I just publish it personally on my Medium account. But what I have been doing is to help people understand that, okay, you're on your path, and along your path, you have experience or imagine emotions like people, and they're standing along your path. And every time you get off your path, they're nudging you a little bit back. I'm like, hey, you're disregarding your boundaries. What's that about? like, oh, maybe you should work on that story and that belief system. Like, that's usually what fear is trying to tell him. Like, I'm not your problem. Your stories are. Take responsibility for your own stories, not me. I'm just trying to move you back to the center of where you belong so you can walk on your path. I call them the guardians of your path. And my latest article was with love, fear. And people are like, how dare you? Like, we need to use fear as a collective excuse of talking about something. Literally, I mean, if you take a look at even people who are very successful and you would consider as influencers, when they talk about fear and overcoming fear, you see a lot of people coming together and everyone talks about their fear. Oh yeah, it's just fear coming up, and it's that fear and that fear. And I just said, I'm like, well, I love how you're all dwelling in your fear excuse and not actually really like, it's so funny how we make fear be that evil thing out there in the world that keeps us from moving forward, when in reality, it's just pointing out the story that you have created through some kind of belief system and education, and knowing that from your parents, that it's like, hey, there's this belief system. Can you please work through that? Maybe even let it go, or maybe there's some healing around that. That's all there is. So I have that letter series where each emotion is writing a letter to you. And I use the most interesting analogies and metaphors, and it was fun to writing that. I mean, I still have some ways to go, but it was interesting how people like, oh my gosh, it changes my whole perspective if I even let this in and let it sink in. And I think the reason is that we have been taught emotions as a physical reaction, but not a spiritual reflection. And that's where I come back, where I'm like, no. We have to understand that emotions are the spiritual guide as well as the physical expression of something that you're off on. And there's nothing negative or positive. It's just a higher vibration and a lower vibration. And you can easily get back to a higher vibration. If you feel anger, it doesn't mean that you can't feel happiness at the same time. Because it's just overlapping, and it depends on whatever we're focusing on. Is that what we're creating more of, right? They're all present. We just choose what we want to focus on. When we can step away, especially when we talk about anger or fear, and like, oh, okay, this is what's showing up. What is the story around that? We become friends with those emotions, and suddenly you feel a deep sense of joy and happiness because you no longer experience them as your enemy, and something that no longer experiences it, that no longer shows up as dark is no longer a threat. And when you don't feel threatened, you start to feel safe. When you feel safe, you start to feel a sense of joy. That's how it's all connected. And I mean, we know there's the history around it with Martin Luther in the 15th century, where he's like, okay, church, you're manipulating people. And then in the 17th century, went with Rene Descartes, who did a lot of research on the spiritual side of emotions. But then the church came in and said, hey, wait a second. We're using emotions to keep our people in line. You can't use that. You can take those blinds off of their eyes, because then we lose power and control. And so we have continued that power struggle and that controlling the people, because how else can you control the masses if you give them free will and free intelligence to explore? I mean, they all can make their own decisions. How dare they?
I love that. No, I love that. I love his. I don't want to distract you too much from what you're saying, but I love his work. But yeah, it's really fascinating. Yeah. The whole concept of what was it now? I think, therefore I am. I think that was his famous statement. So his work's just fascinating. But yeah, carry on.
Yeah, but it's hard to read. Like, I have to read it like 10 times before I get it. It's like, oh, can you just write it in plain something German or English so that I get it? But it definitely was interesting. And he wasn't allowed. He had to actually agree to a deal that he no longer was publicly researching the spiritual side of emotions, and we just continued. And I think now that we're globally come together, because people in Asia who are more having, or even all of, like, if it's India with Buddhism or Hinduism, like all those religions have kept part of that alive in the way they operate. They say that actually people over there who have experienced like a monk life or anything that is more connected, they are happier than over here in the Western world, where everything is just hustle and grind away, right? Because they understand the principle of life, how to stay in the flow of life, how to connect to nature, how to fuel yourself from nature and with nature. And that is, I think, the difference now that we are globally so united, that those teachings swap over, and now people are like, it really resonates with me, but it doesn't go with anything we've been taught. And so now, of course, I don't know if it's consciously or subconsciously, but politics goes into, I'm like, we're losing power here, especially over those young people. That's not going to happen. So we're going to put some other stuff on them. If it's financial burdens, health issues, we put some more crap in the food so they have more to do with being healthy and staying healthy and going to the doctors. So we keep them occupied in certain areas so that they don't evolve. I think a lot of people, like what you see now with the awakening, what people say, I'm woke. It's a lot of younger people that become independent, and independent people you can't control. So even the church comes in, really strong evangelists who like, that's the devil at work. We can't do that. Like anything supernatural. And I'm like, don't you think Jesus was kind of supernatural? I mean, how did he do the healings? I don't know, but he said, even himself said, you will be doing greater things than I, because I will be with the Father. So no matter what religion you believe in, we need to understand that we have more power than what we actually think. But if we acknowledge that power, we can be controlled. And that's the biggest fear of church and politics in general. And it's hard to break through that. I have gotten a lot of messages in terms of, no matter how small you are and people don't actually really know you on that level, they still come. Like, how dare you teach that? Like, we can't teach that. I'm like, watch me. I will.
One of my favorite quotes that I tell my audience regularly is, it's just slipped my mind now. What was it? Just as you were talking, I wanted to say it. It was, don't go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail, which is Ralph Waldo Emerson. And his work's amazing. For anyone who hasn't looked into it, he's a poet from the 19th century, I believe. And his whole concept was like, I think he focused on the thought process and psychology and poetry. There's loads of different things that he was a great thinker generally. And one of the things he said was, or one thing that he realized was, you can't go where the gold rush is. Like, you can't go where everyone is going, because that often tends to be the place where there isn't anything for you. Your path is somewhere separate, and that's where you're going to find your identity. And just it's hard
because we all want to be part of something bigger. That's why terror organizations work so well, because they create a message that resonates with people being one. You're going to be part of us.
That's the thing.
Yeah. And so it is difficult. If you want to create a sense of unity and community, you have to separate yourself first, so you understand which of those puzzle pieces you are and how you're supposed to fit in to the overall picture. And then creating the unity and the community, because we're not supposed to do things on our own. We're not supposed to just totally withdraw. But if we're not doing the internal work, we will never figure out which puzzle piece we're supposed to be and how to fit in. We just choose one that looks the best, and then we fight with someone whose puzzle piece that actually is.
Yeah, there's something important I want to just point out, because you've said the whole story of after college you went to up to the age of 27, you're doing your own thing basically, and you still are. But I mean, like, you were on your own journey up to that point, trying to figure stuff out and not go down the well-trodden path. And there's another quote that comes to mind, which is, if everybody is thinking alike, somebody isn't thinking. And
I like that. Yes.
And as soon as I heard that, I wrote it down, because
it's like, surround yourself with like-minded people.
No, exactly. But I mean, I think up to the age of 21, typically in the schooling system, like, you graduate at 21. But every year, like, I thought about this after I graduated, it's like every year you don't really have time to think or reason to think, because you would know that in the coming semester, like, They're going to tell you what you need to learn. So it's like, oh, okay, like, let me just mess around in my summer holiday or vacation, whatever.
Yeah.
And then finally, when you graduate, that's it. There is no next semester. Like, now it's up to you for the rest of your life to just think about stuff. So it's at that point, because we're so scared and so fearful. And I know I went through this. That's why, like,
Me
and
too.
so many friends and family have gone through it, that we tend to just become scared or become fearful. And so we're like, let's just do the next best thing. Forget it. Let me just go and get a job or whatever it might be. Typically, it's just, let me go get a job.
Just to feel safe. Yeah.
Exactly. But when we take time by ourselves, away from like the tribe, to think about, what do I actually want to do? Hang on, let me just not go with everyone and let me just think about what I want to do. That's when you can actually start reflecting on and putting the pieces of the puzzle, as you were saying, together to form your identity. So I don't know if that speaks to you.
Yeah, perfectly. I think what I've realized lately, and I'm going to be really transparent. I mean, I do a lot of work online, right? And if you take a look at my Facebook, there's so many, like there are a couple thousand people, but I have realized that I got or that I get right now actually really annoyed by a lot of the people, because all I see is the same quotes, the same inspirational quotes and sayings, and just in a little bit of different way. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like annoying. I can't even deal with it. And there's nothing bad about it. Like, there's nothing about the individual who posts that, right? But like you said, when you surround yourself with only like-minded people, you're never being challenged to something else, and how to interact with people that you don't agree with. How can you still be civil and human at the same time, yet you don't agree? Like, we don't challenge that enough. We just click them away and unfollow them. Like, I can't stand you. Or we dismiss them. Like they say, get rid of negative people in your life. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Is it just because you don't agree with people and suddenly I'm like, yeah, you're not part of my life anymore because I don't agree with you? Or are we actually challenged to rise up to that standard of how can we still be human with each other yet we don't agree? And I think that's what we're missing right now, where we're getting in that typical entrepreneurial mindset. Surround yourself with like-minded people, because we took that you are who you surround yourself with a little bit too far, and get rid of everyone else. And that gives that mindset of happiness is required for me to fit in. If I'm not happy, then people won't accept me. But at the same time, we have the other extreme where people dwell in the suffering, because that creates another circle of people like, I can totally feel with you. I understand you. And then we're petting each other's back. So there's never that, can we just create like something in between where we can figure this thing out, and not just the extreme versus the other extreme where we just get sucked into it just because we don't feel comfortable with being ourselves and with being with myself. And that is, I think, a challenge that we see with a lot of big mission entrepreneurs.
I think, yeah, you're right. I never thought of it in that way, actually. You know, the flip side of that whole concept of you are the 5 people you spend the most time with. While it is most definitely true, if you're trying to head in a certain direction and create a mission, you need to brainwash yourself with success and with the mission that you're trying to achieve. But at the same time, you need to be, as you were saying, like aware of some beliefs that you might hold that may not be right. And you can't allow your ego to get in the way of you seeing objectively what the truth is. Because the truth, like, I'm going to send you this video afterwards, and I'll link it in the description for people who are interested. But basically, they were having a debate. It was like on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he was talking about truth, and it's made so much sense to me. And he was saying, and they were talking about Rene Descartes and like a few other guys, and he was saying how truth is objective.
Yes.
It's something that's out there. It's not you. You can't be truth, because then you're measuring truth, assuming the fact that you know everything and that you're right.
Exactly. It's like, I'm just speaking my truth, you know?
Yeah.
Saying, I'm just being authentic. I'm being vulnerable. I'm just speaking my truth. Truth is not just saying whatever you think. Truth is actually equal to love. And when you come from a place of love, there's not just that simple term of, I'm speaking my truth. If you don't like it, just don't listen. We're getting confused there.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're right. And it's about being able to, it's being humble enough, I think.
Yeah.
No, it's two things. It's being humble enough and curious. That's what drives me. So like, I think it's the curiosity more so than anything. It's like, okay, if she or he thinks differently to me, why? Like, why? You've obviously had an upbringing or an intake of, or a download of information that's different to mine. Like, you live in a completely different part of the world to me. So of course your journey is going to be different. So I want to know, like, why do you think that way? Why do you feel that way? Why do you say those things? And it's like, I think people have lost that curiosity and they just think, no, if you don't agree with me, then, you know, it ends there. That's the end of the
You don't
relationship.
belong in my life.
Yeah, it's just, I think it's, yeah, I don't know. I just think that more people need to be curious, because that's one trait that's really helped me grow and expand my boundaries. From like, what else is possible, you know? So, yeah.
I agree.
But no, just to talk about, like, I think we went a massive conversation there just randomly, but I think just want to ask you the definition of like faith-driven success, because I know that's basically the title of your book. So what does that mean to you?
For me, it means success that is not measured by money, but success that is measured by the trust you put into your journey. Really trusting your intuition, tuning in, understanding, okay, those are some of the monsters that I carry around. There are places where I need to heal. This is what shows up even in terms of illnesses. Everything has a message. Everything shows up in a way that is meant to move us forward if we just listen, if we're willing to take the time to heal. And so faith-driven success for me is not necessarily believe in God and join the church. Faith-driven for me means understanding that there's so much more internally that your soul is communicating with you, that it is that any of that, your journey is never being measured by how many people you have served, how much money you have made, how many courses you have sold. It is about the level of trust that you have in your own journey. And that's pretty much where I'm coming from when I wrote the book.
No, I love that. Yeah, I guess it's an individual journey for everyone as well, isn't it? It's like, it's not something that can be replicated. It's not something that you can copy. It's just a faith that you have to have in your own footsteps as you go down your own path. So can you give some examples of like some of the work that you've done with clients, like any memorable stories that come up with you, or like any memorable interactions that you've had?
Well, most of the time when I work one-on-one with clients, besides sometimes I do just emotional clearings. I can do that too because I do energy work and I can do that remotely. So those have been actually really interesting experiences, just doing those kind of sessions with people. One of them, he came to me as a quite young guy, and we somehow connected. People just come to me in the weirdest ways. And he's like, I don't know, I feel kind of stuck. I'm worried about the future. And then it turned out that his lower back hurts a lot. And that was related to worry about the future. So I was able to release some of that that was the trapped emotion that was actually carried down from his father, who had quite an interesting journey himself. And after we released that, his hip problems were gone. But very interesting enough, just a few months later, because suddenly the energy was able to flow and he was able to focus, and then that worry was gone about the future, he's like, I'm just going to move to another country. And he moved to the Caribbean, I think, and he started painting and really getting into his art. He now came back, and now he's like, I'm stepping into my role as a healer. And I'm like, what happened to you? Like a year ago when we talked, there was none of that there. But it just shows that with just one release, he started doing the work himself. I'm like, okay, there must be more to it. There must be. And suddenly you see this big change. Or we released some emotions with people, and suddenly they wrote their book within 2 weeks because there was just something that was there. Or some people just could never express their voice. And so we released some of those trapped emotions around there, and suddenly they understood their voice that they had, and their business took off. Or they rearranged everything that they had for all those years, and suddenly it was just a totally different picture. But when I work with individual clients, they're usually starting out as, I call it the Neo effect, or the Neo journey from the Matrix. They kind of know that there's something different about them, but they feel totally overwhelmed. They can't put their hands on it. They have a lot of anxiety, depression. They don't want to even talk to people. And then they go through that. I have one client in particular, it's just incredible. I'd worked with her for almost 2 years, actually. And so she literally went from that typical mindset of, I need to have a job, I need to have this and that and that and that, and family, but more of from a place of hiding. It felt safe. I can hide behind that. And then suddenly it's just something broke out and she's like, I can't handle that. I have so much anxiety, and the depressive faces are getting too much. Something is different about me. Please help me to define what that is, that different. So we literally strapped, and I usually do a lot of emotions clearings with people, and then a lot of coaching. And again, like, I teach them what it means to really trust your intuition, what it means, what questions you ask yourself, and then exactly what kind of gift do you have as an empath. And then within a couple months, you could see, like, she was very clear on the message that she wanted to purvey to the outside world. And then she started her own business and really connected to her mission and to her passion and can own it now. She has not had, she still sometimes suffers from anxiety, but not in the way that she had before, because now she knows what to do with it at the right time, so she doesn't get into that spiral down where it becomes a vicious cycle of darkness. And it's really fascinating for me to see, like, how people rise. And that's why my slogan is made to rise, how they literally rise up and then use their very unique, almost supernatural gifts to do the impossible, to stand in the gap. Most empaths are called to stand in the gap. We can see both sides of the extreme, and that can be hard because you're the one who literally gets the rotten eggs and the tomatoes thrown at you, literally, and you're just trying to reach for both of their hands, like, can you just come here and talk? And they just like, how dare you pick a side? You need to have an opinion to be part of something. So that is very hard for empath to stand in that gap and to say, I can see both sides. Can we find a way in the middle? Empaths are really good mediators, and it's sometimes hard to own that position because you feel like you're actually an outsider, and it can be a little bit lonely. But yeah, most of the clients have gone through a similar journey, and it's just fun to watch. Like, suddenly you stand on stage, you wrote this book and it becomes a bestseller, and I had nothing to do with it. I just guided them on the journey and made sure that they stayed and stuck with it. I'm like, hey, you can do this. I don't know what's next for you. You do know. I just show you how you can know.
Yeah, that's, it's interesting. As you were talking, I was just thinking, like, I naturally am able to do that as a mediator. I find myself in that position, just like looking at one person's perspective and completely understanding, like, I completely get what you're saying. And then the same with the other side, but they don't seem to understand each other. And I'm like, yes. how can you not see it? But I just thought it was normal. But now you're telling me it's like, maybe I've got a more empathic side to me. That's, I don't know.
Probably, most likely.
So, no, that's interesting. Do you believe in, like, numerology or astrology, anything like along those lines? I don't know if you follow or study any of that stuff.
I haven't studied it, but I do believe that the divine speaks in many different ways. And sometimes it shows up in animals like hawks showing up, who are considered the messengers as a spiritual animal. And I really receive that. The energy is very strong around it. And sometimes I see numbers show up over and over. So then I look at it, I'm like, oh, that makes actually sense. So I don't know if I want to say I totally believe in that. I haven't studied most of that on the deep level, but I can acknowledge how the whole world is communicating with us to keep us on our path, to help us to understand you're guided at every time. Whatever you focus on, this is how I'm going to show you the hints. If you keep focusing on the time the whole time, I'm going to show you 555 the whole time. Or if you're 111, and you can look up what that means, because even in the Bible, numbers have a very specific meaning. So it's not just the science that comes up with the supernatural and the new age kind of stuff. It actually is proven with there too, with the religious side of it. So you can't dismiss it at all, I don't think. So we just have to pay more attention to what it shows up around us. I mean, I have crystals here too. I believe in the chakra because, for one reason, I understand the science behind it, because it literally is the frequency on which color radiates and vibrates and shows up on that is resonating with the same frequency of certain organs. And you just change the frequency according to your meridians and how you stay in balance. So it makes not just on a spiritual level sense, but also on a scientific level, it makes sense. And so, yeah, I think I do believe in it, and I can acknowledge everything as a sign. I mean, I don't go totally crazy and, oh my gosh, this leaf just fell down. What kind of meaning does that have? You know, those kind of things. I just thought it because my plant has a leaf falling. But there's definitely, there's definitely meaning behind all of that.
Mm-hmm. No, that's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of stuff here that we've spoken about that I think people are going to have to go away and research for themselves. But just to get into a final few questions, like with everything that you've done, the journey that you've been on, is there anything different you'd tell the 18-year-old Isabel, or the 18-year-olds that are out there? Would you advise them anything different based on your experience?
I think the major advice that I would give myself at 18 is to trust myself more. I knew that my intuition always told me something different, but it wasn't in alignment with what I knew I should be doing, or what my parents taught me, or what society told me. So sometimes it is really about, even if it doesn't work out, it still had a meaning. You can trust yourself, and it being like, oh, I just trusted myself and it didn't work out. That's probably not true. There was probably just a lesson to be learned, so you can follow and continue your path. But it's just evaluating it and trusting yourself a little bit more, and separating yourself from others. You don't have to buy into that you need to be drunk every weekend to be accepted. You know? So I think if I were to look back, I was like, trust yourself a little bit more, understand how your heart and your brain work together, and then use that for your advantage and live it.
No, I love that message. It's so difficult at that age as well, because I guess we're trying to figure out our identity. So we find it hard to believe in ourselves, even though we know somewhere deep down, like, you know, I know what I really want, but it's that noise is so drowned out, or that voice, is so drowned out at that age. So the second question, if there was one statement that you could write that would go in a time capsule for generations from now to read, what would that one statement be from you?
Yeah. One quote that I always say, or that I came up with, was, you don't just express your emotions, you express a story, and that's your story. So listen very closely so that you can see and hear what your story is about.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's good. I like that, because we all have a different story, and we tend to end up changing it halfway because we look at someone else's and we're like, that one sounds better.
Right.
Yeah. But no, the final question. You've had a long, adventurous journey. You've come to the end of your life now, whatever age that might be. What is the legacy you want to leave behind?
The legacy that I want to leave behind is to help especially younger generations to understand that they have meaning, and that there is a way to communicate and to create peace on an emotional level. Like I said, I want people to understand that we can all come back on the same equal ground through emotional healing.
Yeah, that's what this whole conversation has been about, and I love it, because it's just about changing people's perspective. I was talking to someone just before this podcast, and his whole concept was helping to change people's perspective on what's actually possible. And he was born with a rare condition, so he's got one arm and no legs. So that episode's going to be out soon, and he's a super inspiring guy. And one quote that he says, which just stuck with me the day he said it, was, "The only disability is a bad mindset." And
yes, he has a point. It's true.
And that's the one thing that I think we need to help people understand, is like, there is more than one way to live. We just need to help people come together to understand each other. That's all it is.
It's all about acceptance. What I always say to people is, we have been taught to fix others, to walk in other people's shoes. Like, that's this thing, you need to walk in people's shoes to understand them. Who says that I have to walk in your shoes? Those are your shoes, you know? but we have forgotten to just be with people. People just want to be with someone who's like, there's no judgment. Tell me what you need to say. I'll listen. If you want some reflection or some advice, I'll give it to you. That comes from my perspective, and you can do whatever you want to do with it. But we have forgotten to just be with people, to accept people without the judgment, without the shoulds and shouldn't and appropriate versus inappropriate. It's about acceptance. And I think that is where mindset starts. It's about acceptance, and then being aware of what we want to create from that place. Acceptance. You can only change things once you accept where you're at.
No, definitely. I love that. It's a good way to end this conversation. But for people to find out more about you or to follow you on your journey, where's the best place for them to do that?
The best place to go is my website. It's isabelhunt.com, ISABELHUNDT.com. People always forget the D before the T. Thank my husband for it. But there you can find how to connect with me on social media. If it's Instagram, Facebook, those are the two that I'm most active on. Or how to work with me, how to get my book, which is on Amazon. So you can just Google it. Or my course. I have a course on how to successfully navigate your emotional world, which is very simple yet very profound way of teaching that I do there. So everything people could potentially be interested in is on my website.
Awesome. Well, no, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's been amazing, and we definitely need to do it again.
Yes, definitely.